So, good evening. Dear Minister, Werner Fasslabend, dear Ambassador Hans-Dieter Schweisgut, dear Ambassador Michael Reiterer, dear Professor Susanne Weigelin-Schwiedrzik, dear Brigadier General Nikolaus Rottenberger, dear Excellencies, dear students in the room, ladies and gentlemen, here in presence and also online, good evening. I'm very happy to welcome you to tonight's discussion on the hotspot East Asia, Korea, Taiwan, South China Sea at the Diplomatische Akademie Wien. It is always a particular pleasure to cooperate with the Austrian Institute for European and Security Studies. The region of East Asia is of particular importance, not only for Asia, of course, but also for Europe and, of course, also for the DA. We have this year students from China, Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam studying at the Vienna School of International Studies. We have 73 alumni students from the region and 57 participants from the country of the regions that have participated in our executive training programs. A little bracket, also for the colleagues and participants online, I would like to use this opportunity as well to inform you that we have a new newsletter tool. So if you are interested to continue to receive invitations for our events per email, please don't forget, you need to register in our newsletter tool online. Brackets closed. Our geopolitical situation is, as we know, going through turbulent times. The Russian war against Ukraine, the situation in Gaza, Venezuela, Greenland, just to mention a few topics, have kept our attention recently. But what about the risks the East Asia region is facing? The nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles of North Korea, the Chinese military presence in the Taiwan Strait, the danger of the naval confrontations in the South China Sea, just to mention a few. I would like to thank, in particular, Minister Fasslabend for moderating this discussion this evening, and of course, our distinguished speakers, each of whom has enormous expertise about the countries in Southeast Asia. I wish you all an interesting evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your welcome, and also the Diplomatic Academy for providing this room and this for us and making it possible to have it here. I really want to welcome not only our today's speakers, but all of you. It's a great pleasure to see you, to see so many well-known people, and I just want to mention a few. One in the first row, I've seen the ambassador of Sudan, heartily welcome, but also quite some ambassadors, Munro and Mosa and Turk, and others that I have seen. Please excuse, Strohal, please excuse if I do not mention everybody. For sure, I will forget, but you are included. The same, of course, General Secure Kavanak, great pleasure. Our board members, Ernst Huber, Nikolaus Scholik, and Alfred Gerstl, and everybody who is very often together with us, like Peter Haider, Rauchenberg, and of course also the press, like Burkhard Bischof and others. We have chosen this agenda, Hotspot East Asia, as more or less the opening event for our think tank. As a matter of fact, we had already one here about Sudan, but this is more or less the bigger one, even if there was quite some interest. And we have chosen it because we think that the whole world is talking about security policy, but the hotspots, for sure, will not be in Ukraine. The global hotspots are not in Gaza or in Sudan, but they are situated in East Asia. And therefore, we want to discuss about this agenda and what we can provide for you. We really have tried to find the best, or at least among the best specialists for this agenda, not only in Austria, but all over Europe. And therefore, it's really an extraordinary pleasure for me to present you our speakers. We will start with a professor famous for her Sinology studies and for everything she has already accomplished in her career. She was not only vice rector in Heidelberg, but also dean at the Vienna University, and everybody who has had already the opportunity to meet her only can tell there are only a very small group of people who could compare themselves with her knowledge about China, not only official politics, but also what is behind. Please welcome with me our Professor Susanne Weigelin-Schwiedrzik. Next to her, we have one of the most experienced diplomats, not only in Austria, but also all over Europe. He had not only a usual career, but really a top career in Austria. He became the Austrian ambassador to Japan and afterwards to China. And afterwards, he became also the EU ambassador to Japan and to China. This certainly is unique, and therefore it is highly interesting also to listen to his analysis, because he really had the opportunity to look at this situation from both sides very intensively. Ambassador Dietmar Schweisgut, heartily welcome to you. Yeah, and next to him, we will have another ambassador, Michael Reiterer. He's not only an ambassador, but most of the time he's a professor, because he had two careers in his life, an academic one and a diplomatic one. I do not mention all the institutes and universities he was teaching at and still is teaching. He is a distinguished professor at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy of the Brussels School of Governance. This is just one of his functions. But besides that, he also used to be an ambassador in Europe. He was the first EU ambassador for Switzerland, but he also was EU ambassador for Korea, and therefore he certainly will bring in quite some experiences. And last but not least, of course, we also needed a military man when we are talking about hotspots, and therefore we asked somebody who is not only interested but more than well informed about the situation. I do not want to go too much into his career. He also has an academic career. He also taught has been teaching at Webster University and other institutes. But at the moment, he is the head of the Austrian, of the military diplomacy division. Most people in Austria would know it as the Attaché Abteilung from the Austrian Bundesheer. And this is Brigadier General Nikolaus Rottenberger. Heartily welcome to you. And now I try to finish my introduction. there are a few new things. We not only do have a new year in Europe, but also a new year in China. And we have a completely new situation also in China concerning the situation between politics and military. Maybe you read a little bit or heard a little bit what has happened in the last days, that Xi Jinping got rid of his highest ranking general in the military, in the Central Military Commission. And this certainly will make a difference, and this will have consequences. And at the other side, we also will have new strategies in America due to the fact that there is a new strategy. Maybe not everything is written down in this new strategy, but of course there will be quite a lot of possibilities to talk about it. And in this sense, now I want to open and ask the first speaker, Frau Professor Weigelin-Schwiedrzik. Please, if you start.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to give a little bit of an assessment of this complicated situation in East Asia, which, as we just heard, became even more complicated during the last 2 days. We are actually not extremely sure about what exactly happened in China. We just heard that General Zhang Youxia was obviously taken into custody by Xi Jinping and, of course, those people who do the job for him. And I mean, for someone like me who is following the situation in the People's Republic of China on a daily basis, this was not a total surprise. We actually have been watching Xi Jinping and Zhang Youxia quarreling with each other for more than a year, and actually many people thought that maybe already during the so-called fourth plenum of the Central Committee a few months ago, this situation would have been resolved, because we expected for Xi Jinping to actually step into the second row because of some of the health problems he had had during the last year and the year before. And Zhang Youxia definitely was someone who advocated a slowly retreat from public office by Xi Jinping. I think he was maybe even very vocal in trying to persuade Xi Jinping that maybe the 21st Party Congress was an occasion where he could find a successor for himself. But despite the fact that President Xi Jinping was obviously in not a very, very good health situation during the past months, he doesn't seem to be ready for retirement. So this is maybe one of the reasons why Xi Jinping then had to take action and make sure that he wouldn't be continuously asked to do so by Mr. Zhang Youxia. There are lots of rumors, which I don't want to reiterate here, but I think it is quite clear, and we have been observing this for quite some time, that the party and the military in China is not agreed upon what to do next. And of course, one of those questions is the question of what to do with Taiwan. If we talk about hotspots in East Asia, Taiwan obviously is the major hotspot, although we should not forget about Korea and we should not forget about the South China Sea. But from a Chinese perspective, it's very clear that Taiwan is the most important issue. And I would still forward the argument that at this particular moment, neither the People's Republic of China nor the USA is ready to go to war against each other. I think the basic reason for this assessment is the fact that since the Cuban crisis in the 1960s, the big nuclear powers have come to the agreement that they should not go to war against each other. This implies that the probability that even if the People's Republic of China should decide to attack Taiwan, the probability that the USA is interfering into this conflict directly is comparatively small. This, however, does not exclude the possibility that the US will take measures to open a second war theater in East Asia in order to make it very difficult for China to pursue its plans. So Korea is, of course, here the place we should have an eye on, because if something happened in Korea, this would be very detrimental to China pursuing its plans with regard to Taiwan. But we have also seen recently that, of course, the Philippines are a very, very hot spot in East Asia, and that the leadership in the Philippines is very much willing to act as a proxy for the US in making things difficult for China. But in addition to this, I think we also have to look at minor actors in the region that might have reasons to actually provoke China to go to war against Taiwan. And the most important minor actor in this context is, of course, the president of Taiwan, who, as you all know, is a very articulate proponent of independence for Taiwan. And he has been more and more articulate in this sense since he took over office in early 2025. So if we look at his position at this moment, I think he is a politician that takes every opportunity that he can take in order to make us remember that his final aim is declaring independence for Taiwan. However, he knows that this is a very, very risky business, because as soon as he will declare independence for Taiwan, Beijing will take action. The so-called anti-secession law actually compels the Beijing government to take any kind of action, including military action, against any province that is trying to declare independence from the People's Republic of China. This is the so-called red line, and everybody knows that if you want to provoke the People's Republic of China into war, you have to declare independence. This also means that if, because of some reason, the US decides that they want to provoke China into war, they can give a call to Mr. Lai Ching-te and ask him to declare independence. So this is, of course, a very tricky situation that the Peking government is very aware of, and Xi Jinping actually spoke repeatedly about this very delicate situation, which is very, very, how should I say this, complicated for China, because China has a principle, a very interesting principle, which is they will never start a war. I'm not so sure whether they are really so honest about this, because according to my assessment, the war against India in 1961 was actually initiated by China, and the war against Vietnam in 1978 was also initiated by China. So, of course, you can always sort of find an argument to explain why it was not initiated by China, but de facto it was initiated by China. But it's quite interesting that they repeat time and again that they don't want to initiate any war in the East Asian region. I think we also have to think about a possibility that only became clear to me during recent months. I think when the US was preparing for a potential strike against Iran, the foreign minister of the People's Republic of China visited the foreign minister of Russia. And I think any strike against Iran is very, very difficult for China and Russia to accept. And the two foreign ministers might have talked about the possibility of somehow providing support to Iran in this situation. However, it's very clear that China will be very reluctant to directly intervene into anything beyond its borders. Taiwan is the only thing they can do which is not beyond their borders, because, as you all know, the People's Republic of China believes that Taiwan is an integral part of the People's Republic of China. But quite interestingly, we saw the People's Republic of China organizing yet another blockade around Taiwan very shortly after this April 1st meeting in Moscow on April 2nd. They launched yet another blockade, and it seems quite clear from my side that they were actually giving a signal by this blockade. It was the first blockade they organized without any immediate reason. Usually they would say, you know, we are now doing this because of that. This blockade on April 2, and by the way, also the blockade on December 29 of last year, is a blockade without an immediate reason. They never said that they had a reason why. They proclaimed in April that establishing blockades around Taiwan would be the new normal, and for that reason, they didn't have to give any reasons on December 29. But I think that they are giving signals that they might open a second war theater if any other actor, especially the US, opens a theater in some place which is not good for China. And to go to war against Iran is something that China definitely does not want to see how they actually formulate this thing. So from my point of view, there's only one problem left, which is the internal situation in China, which might actually trigger a warlike or a war situation in East Asia. And that is the reason why we have to be very worried at this particular moment. Because with the situation inside the Chinese leadership being as conflictual as it is, President Xi Jinping might come to the conclusion that the only way for him to actually preserve his position as the leader of the Communist Party of China would be to go to war against Taiwan. This is not a totally improbable option, and I think we have to have this in mind, especially if we come to an assessment of the situation between the Chinese military leadership and the Chinese civilian leadership. According to my analysis, the PLA is not very enthusiastic about a war against Taiwan. That is the reason why, according to my observations, they are very active in showing us that they can do lots of things with Taiwan which are below the threshold of war. And these blockades that they have been exercising several times during the last years, they actually show which method they would prefer in order to coerce Taiwan into complying with Peking's plans. And according to my understanding, the last two blockades were very, very important to analyze because they showed very clearly that the whole blockade business is a business of blockading, of course, harbors. And why do they blockade harbors? Because the island of Taiwan is very dependent on imports coming to the island on a daily basis. And very important in this respect is, of course, the import of energy from outside. And as far as I'm informed, Taiwan only has storing capacities for gas and oil that go for 2 weeks. So this implies that if China shows its capacity to blockade Taiwan time and again, and the time between blockades gets smaller and smaller, this will have an enormous impact on the economic stability of Taiwan. And we have historical sort of precedences where an economic pressure on Taiwan actually led to a split in the leadership and the leading elites in Taiwan among those people who say, you know, rather than going into a situation where our economy collapses, we have to collaborate with our new overlord. And for that reason, we should be pragmatic. And there are other people who do not want to be pragmatic, but who are, maybe we could call them fundamentalists, and say, you know, we can never succumb to any pressure from outside. If we look at the situation in the year 1895, when Taiwan became a Japanese colony, actually between the signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki and Japanese troops arriving in Taiwan, there was a certain period of a few months. And in this situation, the Taiwan governor declared independence. And very quickly, he actually thought that this wouldn't work out. So he declared independence in May, and he left the island in June. But nevertheless, Taiwan was without a government for a certain period of time. And in this situation, the society of Taiwan was going under enormous turmoil. It was a total anarchy. And in this situation of total anarchy, the elites decided that they needed to take action. And the kind of action they took was that they actually succumbed to the Japanese wishes of making Taiwan into a colony. And this is quite an interesting example. And I think that the Peking leadership is somehow hoping that they could induce such a split inside the Taiwanese leadership, and we already know that the Taiwanese leadership is not united under the leadership of Mr. Lai Ching-te, and even the Taiwanese population is not united under the leadership of Lai Ching-te, because when they voted him into his position as president, they only gave him 40% of their votes, and in the legislative yuan, he is in a minority position, which shows that they don't want him to do everything he might wish to do. So this, according to my understanding, the only consensus you could establish between party and military in China is by taking this sort of below the threshold of war measure in order to reach your aims. And when the party wants the military to go beyond this option, then they actually have not found a consensus at this moment. And this is one of the reasons why Mr. Zhang Youxia seems to be imprisoned. We don't even know whether he really is imprisoned. He might have escaped. But we'll have to wait and see if he really was rescued before he could be taken to prison. This would imply, according to a number of analysts, that he would use the military to go against the party, and this would be a very, very difficult situation in China. So let's wait and see, and let's hope for the best that Mr. Xi Jinping does not take the decision that going to war against Taiwan is the only option he has. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. And now it's your turn, Ambassador. We are looking forward because what has happened in Japan is also new. we have a new prime minister, and we will have elections pretty soon because she dissolved. And she also had a new relationship with China, obviously, at least in a certain moment. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, and also how you see the development in China.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure you can call that a relationship at the moment, but let me explain why. Yes, I think I will want to say a few words on the United States, obviously, and Japan. I don't think I can add anything to what Professor Weigelin-Schwiedrzik said on China, and especially on Taiwan, because I really think I do agree with her analysis, which I think also provided a very interesting historic background, which is sometimes a bit forgotten. Now, one thing, of course, which is always in everybody's mind is, do we see a change in the United States position, not only in Europe, which we sort of all painfully experienced and are still experiencing almost every day, but is there a new posture also with regard to East Asia and the Indo-Pacific? And Minister Fasslabend mentioned already the new national security strategy of the United States, which was published in late November and which was supplemented only a few days ago by a new national defense strategy. Now, there have been people saying that it doesn't really make much sense or it's worth the time to go into any detailed analysis, because this certainly is not the framework for any kind of reasonable assessment of what President Trump will do in the future. But I think it's still quite interesting, because there have been suggestions said that obviously there is a fundamental change in the whole posture. And I think this is true in attitude. And of course, President Trump has never missed an opportunity to disparage the policy of his predecessor and to distinguish himself in all and every aspects from that. But if you have a closer look at what the United States are basically saying in these two strategies, I think you do see quite a bit of continuity. One thing which I found interesting is that the continuity, of course, is not there when you look at Europe. But if you look at the wider picture, of course, number one is clearly now America's focus on the Western Hemisphere, subordinating in a way everything else to that. But on the other hand, if you read carefully, you see that the Indo-Pacific and also the South China Sea and Taiwan do feature among the issues where the United States feels that this is vital to keep its position as number one in the world. And I think in the whole strategy, you always have this sort of statements, either explicit or implicit, that we are number one, we will stay number one, and we have a near peer, which is China, which we will have to address. And I think the interesting difference in nuance is not in an all-out confrontation, but in clearly in a way of credibly deter any action of China which could threaten our number one position. And that certainly applies to the protection of the first island chain. And when people are saying that it doesn't specifically mention Taiwan, well, there wouldn't be a first island chain without Taiwan, obviously. But the one thing which I found interesting is that this is not exactly the same priority which the strategy gives to the Korean Peninsula, where I see a bit more of sort of a comparison to how Europe is treated in the two strategy papers, namely saying that, yes, obviously the DPRK, North Korea, is an important issue, a security threat for the region, could even threaten in terms of long-range missiles the territory of the United States. But it is principally an issue to be dealt with by South Korea, by the Republic of Korea. a bit the same way as they say Europe is strong enough in terms of its economy, etc., to deal with Russia in Europe. But that's quite different how, if you read it, how the Indo-Pacific, how the South China Sea is presented, where they specifically say these are actually our core commercial and trade interests in a region where 1/3 of total global trade passes through. This would have tremendous implications for the United States. So that, I think, is important to keep in mind. What is also important to keep in mind, however, is that these are the strategy papers. Allies in the region also look at actions. And Professor Weigelin-Schwiedrzik mentioned especially also the last blockade maneuvers on December 29th, which took place. And obviously, a lot of people would have expected an American reaction to that, which was virtually absent. And the same thing happened in a way after the relatively new Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi, when she made her statement in response to a question in the Japanese Diet about the security situation around Taiwan, when she said, well, any act of war or blockade, she was not very clear about that, in Taiwan would lead to an existential threat to Japan, which could require action. And this was, of course, interpreted as meaning that Japan would be involved militarily in the case of an attack. And there also it was quite interesting that there was at first no American reaction to that, then a bit of a tepid sort of support from the ambassador, but absolutely nothing from the president, who had a phone call with Xi Jinping and afterwards a phone call with the Japanese Prime Minister, of which not much transpired, but the Chinese, of course, put it in a way saying that Trump was telling the Japanese Prime Minister this was out of order, which was certainly not the case. But on the other hand, what you do have is that the new Japanese government is determined basically to follow the line of the former late Prime Minister Abe, who fundamentally changed, if you want, the defense posture of Japan, but also the overall, I would say, Japan's vision of its place in the Indo-Pacific. It was actually not the United States, but it was Japan coining this phrase of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And it was Abe, when he became Prime Minister in 2012, who, before he did anything domestically, started out his outreach to the ASEAN countries, to the United States, to make sure that everybody understood Japan was back. And that is something, I think, what the new Prime Minister, who many see as a former protege of Prime Minister Abe, is basically trying to follow on in her defense and security policy. She said very early on that she wanted to review the Japanese security defense policy and also the build-up program, which actually is only 3 years old. She said in a very early statement she wants to bring forward Japan's decision to double its defense outlays to 2% of GDP, which is in Japan is really something which only a couple of years ago would have led to fierce resistance also from the public. And she made this statement on Taiwan, where many people say this was not a very wise thing to do. I think she probably also came to that conclusion, but obviously she cannot step back. And the Chinese reaction, I think, is something which a lot of people, when you look at it, went a bit sort of over the top. I don't think it carries a lot of credibility saying that the ugly head of Japanese militarism raised its head again and Japan is becoming a military threat to the region. I think probably there are rather more people thinking that if there is a military threat in the region, it comes from another side. And of course, it had another effect. It had the effect basically of rallying support in Japan. That even in a country which has always been rather divided, and where the nationalist part of especially the LDP was never really able sort of to carry enough weight also to change the constitution, all at a sudden I think you have a much broader consensus on that. Now we will see if that is enough to help her win the elections on February 8th, which will of course not be the result of the deteriorating relations with China, but it will be all about the economy in reality, like in many other countries also. But in case she were to win a mandate to form a majority government with her new partner in the government, then I think it would strengthen her position, and I don't think it would lead in the short term to an improvement in the relationship with China. I would rather expect that we could see something similar, which we saw in the early years of the Abe administration from 2012 onwards, where relations were also in the deep freezer, and where Abe basically just sat it out, and it was rather the Chinese side which eventually came back and started to normalize the relationship. We will see how that turns out. When we talk about the hotspots, I think we didn't mention one which from a Japanese point of view is a very serious one. It's not only the South China Sea, but it's the East China Sea, and Chinese increasing intrusions in what the Japanese see, of course, their territorial waters around the Senkaku Islands. And if you look at the figures and the number of intrusions on, it really happens almost on a daily basis. On the other hand, I think there is an incentive for both sides to make sure that the situation does not escalate beyond a point of no repair. And you can see that also from the Chinese reaction in terms of concrete measures in the economic field. I mean, the first step was basically to stop the import of all fish products. The second one was to discourage travel to Japan, which is to a certain extent effective, but it's not the total ban. And the third one, which potentially is more serious, was the announcement that there would be more scrutiny of dual-use technology items exported to Japan. But what we are seeing, I interpret it more as a careful calibration in terms of actual measures as compared to a rhetoric which, to my view, goes a bit over the board. Interestingly, also always now going back to 1943, the Cairo Declaration, the Potsdam Declaration, and also slowly sort of trying to make sure that everybody understands that the Chinese claim to global power and leadership dates back from the fact that they were in the small group of victorious country, and Japan was the aggressor and finally the defeated nation, which never ever has a right to come back in terms of a defense posture of what would be the normal attitude of a country in the region. Also interesting, I think, is Japan's relationship with the Korean Peninsula, and especially South Korea, and I'm sure that Ambassador Reiterer is going to say more about that also, because during the whole time of the Abe administration, the relationship was actually dysfunctional, and it only became sort of closer after he had left office, and it made a major step forward with the Camp David Agreement of 2023, when President Biden managed basically to bring the two sides together for a three-party agreement. And the question was, when with the change of leadership in Korea also, if this would endure, given the fact that the Korean President Lee is not really supposed to be on the same line as his predecessor in terms of China policy and also Japan policy, and Prime Minister Sakaichi is seen as a nationalist outlier who would not necessarily be able to find allies in South Korea. But it was quite interesting to watch that. First of all, of course, the first visit of President Lee was to China, after he had already met with both leaders at the APEC summit in Korea last autumn. But he immediately, or shortly after that, went to Japan for a visit which seemed to confirm that both sides really don't want to break from the last years of a more constructive relationship, and also see much more eye to eye on a lot of issues, including regional policy, the Indo-Pacific, and of course, both are still very much also involved in a policy of rapprochement with like-minded partners, including in Europe, with NATO, with the European Union. And I think this is certainly reciprocated also from Europe and the European Union, for which both Japan and Korea are absolutely vital partners in a world where the United States has dissociated itself from an order the Europeans still think is something worthwhile keeping or rebuilding. And therefore, I think it's clear that for Europe, watching hotspots in East Asia and developments among the rival parties there is something which also has a direct effect on our future posture and how we play a role in an evolving world order, the structure of which we don't really quite see yet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Schweisgut. And now we come to the next ambassador, professor. And I ask Michael Reiterer for his presentation. He has prepared a few, maybe this is an understatement, a few charts in order to give us also a lecture about Korea, which maybe is not so present in our minds as China and Japan. Please, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much. Very good occasion to get over my jet lag. I came back from Japan yesterday morning. I had the pleasure of guest professorship there in Kyoto, and but I made some side trips also to Seoul, and having served in both countries, I'm trying to be a little bit of a bridge between the two. Well, I suppose the best thing is I give you a sort of overview, because Korean Peninsula is context. And it is perhaps not so much known how this region has developed. So I just would like to underline that for most of its history, we were talking about Korea and not about the Korean Peninsula. The Korean Peninsula has kicked in basically after the division of the two. But as you see here, the dates until the end of the Japanese colony, Korea was one. And then was the separation, the Korean War, and the armistice and the demarcation line, demilitarized zone, which is one of the biggest misnomers in history, because this is one of the highly militarized zones in the area. Well, unification is not for tomorrow. Well, we have said that about Germany, but I'm pretty sure it's not for tomorrow in Korea. It is, last time it happened was during the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, that the two countries came under one flag. In between, North Korea has got rid of the idea of unification. It's no longer in its constitution, and it regards nowadays South Korea as an enemy. The present president, President Lee, is trying to establish contacts with North Korea, but so far not very helpful. On everybody's side, he has asked recently even the United States if they could have a special envoy in order to establish contacts. Also on the South Korean side, I mean, foreign policy starts at home. I was in Seoul on December 3rd. I have seen what has happened during that night. I mean, now they have overcome the problem, and the legal proceedings are going on. But for some time there was some real concern whether they were trying to put back the clock, because the martial law and dictatorship, that was part of the history of Korea. So right now it's a little tick perhaps in the history, but certainly of concern. Well, also history. I had the pleasure in the year 2000 to accompany the President of the European Commission, Romano Prodi, at the time, to the ASEM summit in Seoul, and to congratulate Kim Dae-jung to receiving the Peace Nobel Prize because of his contribution of solving the problem with North Korea. Well, I think we know by now, when you get the Peace Nobel Prize, then troubles are ahead, and that has been confirmed several times. But we have seen quite many changes. I mean, the main change was, I experienced that also in 2017, when there were a lot of tensions, fire and fury. I think in the only time in my diplomatic history I was discussing with member states the possibility of evacuation of nationals, which was a very frustrating exercise, by the way. But then it came for a short time, the bromance between Kim and Trump. But the problem is not solved, and the new game changer is the engagement of Russia. And you see the two happy guys driving a car. So that has repercussions on the whole security situation in the region. There was already mentioned a little bit about South Korea and China. Yes, Xi Jinping engaged. Well, he came to the APEC summit because he will be the host of APEC next time, and he did not break with the tradition. On the other hand, as Trump did not participate in the APEC meeting, he left the rostrum to Xi Jinping, and he made good use of it. He also made a state visit, and he invited President Lee back. And that was suddenly accelerated. I know that from my colleagues in the MOFA in Seoul. Suddenly, there was an opening for a state visit in January. Well, with the compliments of Mr. Trump, I'm pretty sure. What is important for Korea there is China is an important, or the important trading partner. It's the number source of tourists. So when there was this limitation of tourists, the first reaction in Kyoto was, oh great, over-tourism might be reduced a little bit. But on the other hand, the economy basically needs them. One of the requests President Lee brought to Xi Jinping was to see if he could be helpful to reopen the lines of communication with North Korea. Well, we have already heard today about the Taiwan contingency. Well, the interesting part would be, if there is a Taiwan contingency, would there also be a Korean Peninsula contingency? Could Mr. Kim think this is a very good occasion in order to start skirmishes or a war with South Korea, and that would not be the first time. They have already bombarded islands in the past. What is now? Now technology is not working. Now it works. Well, U.S. and South Korea. Well, the United States would like to modernize the security agreement. Well, that's a little bit of a misnomer, because the security agreement was concluded originally as defense against North Korea. And the United States would like to get South Korea also to get engaged in containing China, which is not in the interest of South Korea because of the economic and also political situation. It's also interesting that South Korea negotiated so far successfully that they could build nuclear submarines. The inspiration is from AUKUS, obviously, and also to provide the United States Navy with battleships if the US changes the internal law, because right now only boats built in the United States can be for the Navy. Then Korea would like to take back wartime control. That's probably not very well known, but in case of war, the command would not be with the Koreans, but it would go to the commander of the United Nations, and the commander of the United Nations is the commander of the US troops. So that's not something which goes down very well with a nationalistic feeling. Then the discussion is going on, should South Korea go nuclear, either directly or through weapons of the United States on the territory of South Korea. Well, again, there's a cyber attack.
North Koreans probably.
Yeah, North Korea is listening in. Well, that would be the question then of non-proliferation and denuclearization of North Korea, which is an issue, but it's also not for tomorrow. And I think to think that one can base negotiations with North Korea on denuclearization first, forget it. That will never happen. You can keep it as a long-term goal, but certainly not to get negotiations started. This is extremely interesting. If you look here, this is a statement by the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Elbridge Colby, on the 26th of January, where he was saying that model ally. You can read that all very, very quickly, but 26th of January, breaking news. That's how you treat a special ally. So, and I think it's on the same time, same day because of the time difference. By the way, I think this is also a message to the European Parliament. We have already talked, but I will go over it. The strategically importance, the two chains, where Korea also, of course, plays an important role. What is South Korea doing? Well, they are thinking to hedge their positions. One of the possibilities is to work closer with Quad. With the second pillar of Quad, which would be the more technological one. The inspiration of AUKUS I have already mentioned. South Korea has already declared they want to join CPTPP. And I think Dietmar already mentioned the Camp David agreement, whether the spirit of can be maintained. What is also important for security, we see here between Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea a technological triangle. When we were used to it's the economy stupid, I am always inclined to say it's the technology stupid, because we don't have only a trade war, we also have a technological war, and that I think this is getting more important. Well, we have all these gentlemen here. They were already mentioned today. This is also a concern, as you can see, within the European Union. One of the statements of the High Representative, when she was not talking about Russia, so I think it's quite interesting to have it. The Japan-Korea relationship was already mentioned. I think pictures tell you the mood when you see the different encounters here. And Martina, I would say you have to add something to the curriculum here in the house, because what is new is Trump diplomacy. So I think that seems to be quite effective and created positive vibes, but positive vibes are certainly needed because Dr. Takeshima is still a big issue between Korea and Japan. You might wonder, why are they heckling about these few rocks and islands here? Well, it's the 200 miles around them which make them interesting, plus the history. There is, of course, also positive developments. There is the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat between China, Japan, and South Korea. Technically, or in theory, they are even negotiating a free trade agreement between the two countries, but that's going with the speed of a snail, and a rather slow snail, but I mean, it's still going on. And they are concentrating very much, as you can see here, on people-to-people contacts, where they do have some successes. Well, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, the partnership with NATO. One should not forget it. It's an exchange of ideas, could lead to a change of information. However, NATO has been very clear. There is no intention of an out-of-area involvement. South Korea and Russia. Well, I know that Kim is not the president of South Korea, but it overshadows the whole relationship here. When it comes to diplomatic ties, to security concerns, economic impact, energy and trade, there has been quite some changes. Relations were relatively friendly, but when South Korea joined the sanctions against Russia, they were called an unfriendly country. But at the same time, South Korea, in its hedging policy of a good middle power, is trying not... I'm blocking myself, I'm controlling myself. We have seen, of course, this big change, which is also a signal that the security between Asia and Europe is intertwined, because if North Korean soldiers meet South Korean arms in the Ukraine, then you see the very close connection. And also North Korea and Russia have signed basically an alliance agreement that in case of war, they would help each other, which is significant because between South Korea and North Korea, there's only an armistice, so they are at war. Well, last but a short reminder between the relationship Japan and North Korea, which is still very much dominated by the unresolved abduction issue, which has to be overcome in order to make progress. Well, one should also talk a little bit about Europe, at least at the end. Europe, unfortunately, is not the game changer in the region. That's, I must admit, despite some efforts of the last 20 years. But when you look at the relationship with South Korea, it's the country, the European Union has practically all the agreements which you can sign. They are signed. The challenge is, of course, to move from words to deeds. So very recently, 4 or 5 days ago, the South Korean foreign minister was in Brussels because the strategic dialogue was elevated to the level of foreign ministers. So there is a possibility, but it's not extremely likely that we would see big changes or big engagement from the European side coming. Last word on EU North Korea, there we have what is called a critical engagement policy, where I see a lot of critic but a little engagement. European Union is following the United Nations sanctions. There are also autonomous sanctions. We have 6 member states who have their embassies in Pyongyang, but they don't have very good access. So it is a presence which can be helpful. So in short, well, it is a hotspot, and the history of Korea tells us as a bridge between China, Japan, and its own input. It is the perfect example of a middle power which is trying to arrange itself in hedging where it can. And there, I always argued, is a chance for the European Union to get engaged. And also then, as a sort of create a network, because that's what we need nowadays with the interesting gentleman who is sitting in the White House. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation and also where you showed all the interdependencies between the actors and yeah, what is going on. And what we have learned now is what has been going on in the ministries, in the floors of diplomats, and now we are looking what is going on the ground. And Brigadier General Rottenberger will also show us a short presentation what is going on the ground. And on the ground does not mean only terrestrial, but also in the sea and in the air.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me tonight, Mr. Fasslabend, Excellencies, General. Glad to be here. I'm a graduate of this academy, and this is something always nice to be coming back here. I started with a claimer, so to say, because I'm official. I'm active officer of the Austrian Armed Forces. So what I will tell you now and what I present to you now not necessarily affects the official position of the Austrian Ministry of Defense. I'm sorry, I have to start with that. Whoever is here from the Chinese embassy, so I think we have a celebration tonight somewhere in Vienna, which where the Chinese embassy is present. Yeah, nevertheless, just I get excellent support from a researcher. From Tara Bregler, who's also here in the audience. Thank you very much. And I thought about giving you some insight, let's say, or a quick overview, because some data and what I will present to you is mainly open source data. And I will start with a comparison and a bit looking on the military balance between the US, China in the region. And I thought about starting with the US Indo-Pacific Command, which as such exists since 1947. The US fought the Pacific War successfully, driven by the plans of Chester W. Nimitz. All these battles of World War II in the Pacific, these are something which are still a study ground for military on the Pacific Rim. And talking about the Pacific Rim, the Western Pacific Rim or the Eastern Pacific Rim, so I hope the pointer works. The Western Pacific Rim or the Eastern Pacific Rim, and I just keep in mind that Taiwan, the admiral who, so to say, shaped the strategic thinking and geostrategic thinking of how to control areas on the sea. And he concentrated on the rims. So, and this is what I've been in a very good slide before shown, that the two island chains, what we have seen here, first island chain and second island chain. What I present to you here now is an overview about the US Indo-Pacific Command. It's called Indo-Pacific Command since 2018. Roughly it contained 300,000 US soldiers in the overall Pacific region on both sides of the rim. This is 20% of all active US forces. The 7th Fleet based in Japan, the 3rd Fleet based in Hawaii. Oh, sorry, this is based in Hawaii. And the 7th Fleet from 11 carrier groups, almost a third is in this region. The 11 carrier groups the US have. We have the US Army in Japan with around 50,000 personnel, with the headquarters in Yokota. In Korea, the 8th US Army. In Hawaii, 25th Infantry Division. In California, part of the Indo-Pacific Command is the 1st Corps. And we have in Korea, the 7th US Air Force with significant, very, very modern equipment. Altogether, and that's, I think, is striking, we have the international dateline, 66 of all bases with you see here, 66 bases. From the 66 bases of the US, 26 eastward and 40 westward of the international dateline. So giving a little bit more overview. When it comes to strategic forces, the US has the largest strategic arsenal. I think this is rather well known, but China is catching up. Significantly expanding its anti-access and area denial capacities. But in the field of strategic nuclear long-range capabilities, the US continues to possess the most technologically advanced strategic forces and deployment capabilities. When it comes to air power, we have estimated, the US have estimated 13,000 aircrafts worldwide. A large portion is here. And China, with approximately 3,000 aircrafts in the airframes system, including 1,200 combat aircrafts, is in the region an important player. The US leads in the field of air power in terms of quantity and quality, with a greater operational range and global reach, while China is catching up strongly in the region and threatening US air superiority closer to its core territory. Land forces, as we see here, which includes both Army, US Army, Marines, and I will also talk about the People Liberation Army Ground Forces here. US Army is world at 480,000 soldiers. This is less impressive if you consider China, the PLA, with approximately 2 million. I mean, it had 3 million in the 1970s, and then when Deng Xiaoping cut it down to 2 million, or some even say only 500,000. That's disputed, but I will come back to China here. We see that China has significantly more land forces in terms of numbers. Naval forces, and that's also interesting. Naval forces is the China with a larger fleet in terms of numbers, expanded very rapidly, has now up to 370 ships. Rapid expansion is predicted. The US has only 300 warships. I talked about the 11 nuclear-powered carrier groups, aircraft carrier groups. The US has available global logistics, a large submarine fleet with multi-purpose and ballistic missile submarines. China has its difficulties to deal with the submarine fleet. Nevertheless, we will see about the distances. When we talk about the distances from the US, these between 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers from mainland to US, to the western rim, depending on which area you're pointing at. So I would like to sum up here that when it comes to strategic forces, the US has a global nuclear long strike capability. China has rapidly growing but regionally focused. In Air Force domain, the US has a larger technological superior force, and China, the BLA Air Force, is strongly modernizing in the short-range field. Land forces, the US modern, networked with specialized marine forces and capabilities, while China, and then it comes when we talk about in military analysis, when we talk about the potential, we differ between capacity, which is mainly, if I put it in simple words, mainly about numbers, figures, and capabilities. What can you do? What can you achieve? And in that sense, when it comes to land forces, we are not very sure about China's capabilities. Naval forces, highly technological and globally networked on the yes side, and China now the largest fleet in the world, growing regional focus. Give you some insight on the distance we have here from Hawaii to Guam, how long it takes to reach Hawaii and Guam are the more two strategic logistic bases for the Indo-Pacific Command. Very important. The distances are enormous. It needs 9 days from Hawaii to Guam, and in Guam you can change logistics or resupply, and then you have to proceed further into, let's say, South China Sea, or you go from Hawaii to Yokosuka to the bases in the military bases in the area, or to Korea. So that's, so to say, what's clearly in disadvantage for the United States is the distance, or the curse of long distances. So another I think interesting picture. I mean, the ambassador former ambassador to Korea, Ambassador Reiterer, gave already an interesting slide that is just concentrating on the military balance in this particular region. We talked about the THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, which is anti-ballistic missile defense. And you see the numbers of bases here in South Korea. Well, I must say that the quality, the capability of the Republic of Korean Army, the South Korean Army, is not to be underestimated. It was always, since the 1960s, a very capable fighting force, and very few people know that they were also fighting in Vietnam. First Division, Capital Division of the Republic of Korean Army was fighting in Vietnam, and in their theater of operation, this was the quietest area in South Vietnam during the war from 1965 to 63, because of the effectiveness of the South Korean forces. And you see, I have here also a slide about the distances of North Korean ballistic missiles. Another slide I want to present to you, which I found striking, interesting. It's a little bit reminds us of what we had in the 1960s, when in the US you could study an area, or there was research done in an area called Sovietology, to understand the Soviet Union. And one of the first things which came up back then in the 60s is that American political scientists tried to understand the Soviet Union in the way that they had changed the maps, turn it upside down, that you see the world from a Moscow perspective. This map gives you a view from, let's say, from a Pyongyang perspective to the first line, or island line, and also gives an impression otherwise, so you can see it from Seoul, from South Korea, how the distance is for supply and support from US bases in Manila, or on Honshu, or in this area, and the distances. Yeah. Okay. So, short display on deployments on the Korean Peninsula. The biggest number of strategic ballistic missiles in North Korea is concentrated in this area, operational ballistic missiles in this area, and all short-range missiles which mainly can target areas south of Seoul up until to this red spot. Sorry, I cannot reach the other. No, cannot. Sorry, you have to follow me here. So, and there's another actors in the area, the Philippines, which I visited in September last year, or Indonesia or Vietnam, which have security arrangement sometimes among each other, sometimes with the US, or what we have seen here, Australia and New Zealand. We have also Australian as a capable actor in the region, building up its capacities with around 30 naval bases, and US military with bases in Australia shall not be underestimated, because that, so to say, broadens the American power projection on China. And you see here also the territorial claims of China, the exclusive zone. So, very quick, just to give an impression, going into the history of the BLA and the deployment, we have here the major ground units. The BLA, the People Liberation Army, is heavily influenced by Russian doctrine and Russian organizational structure. So when Russia in February 2022 invaded Ukraine and did not succeed in an area of operation which was close, where it was, so to say, locked up, was linked to, with railway lines going from Russia into Ukraine, and could not manage to defeat the Ukrainian armed forces, this was, I would say, caused shock waves in the military system in China. This is what the Chinese have not expected. For the Chinese, the Russian armed forces, both the Soviet and the Russian armed forces, were among one of the finest and most capable armed forces in the world. That's why they designed them. They interested in Western technology, but when it comes to doctrine, they were much more influenced by Russian doctrine. The BLA Navy was not until the 1990s in the center of modernization. And that changed dramatically in the 1990s through several different guidances of the Chinese Communist Party to increase the capabilities in the region. This way. And here's I find quite a good unclassified slide, giving you an idea about the China's shipbuilding capacity in relation to the shipbuilding capacity of the current US. And this is, you see a dramatic shift. So, does it work? No, it works. The dramatic shift. And the number of production numbers here in China. If I'm not mistaken, I read in an article about 7 or 8 shipyards on the east coast of China who are producing 24/7 ships. 24/7. Yeah. And this is a slide I want to present you, giving you to figure a little bit to understand the figures more visualizing the figures, and it gives you a number. Then at the end of the day, even if the United States have superior technology and superior command and control technology and ISTAR technology, it's still numbers will figure in any type of conflict. Numbers will still figure, because if you lose a carrier, you have a carrier less. Yeah. If you lose an advanced missile destroyer, you have one less. And you cannot produce one in World War II within 1 or 2 months and send it into the region. That changed a lot. And as I displayed the production, the US industry is not prepared for mass production. The Chinese are doing mass production. That's a difference. Also, I would say one of the weaknesses, especially submarine and battle management technologies. Here's a little bit about the activities in the region. This is 2023. So you can see which type of ships were around here. This is May, this is April. I have another slide about the BLA Justice mission, about the military exercises in December last year, mentioned already, but maybe you're interested in having a slide where you can see in which areas the People Liberation Army Navy was exercising all around Taiwan. So, yeah, that's it. That's it. To sum it up, the interesting thing in so to say analyzing the two rivals, China and the US, in a possible future conflict in the region, is about capability. What are they able to achieve? And especially the curse of long distance for the United States, long distance support will be, and logistics will be the big organizational weakness of the United States. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess this was a list of hard facts, and I'm sure you will remember all of them for the future. Okay. My plan was now to have another discussion round in the panel. I'm looking at my watch and see it is already advanced, and therefore I would like to give you the chance just for a few questions, and I would ask my panelists, not only to prepare their statements for what is asked by the public, but also maybe some remarks, to give us some remarks also to what we have heard from the other panelists. But I just would like to give the public the chance to ask a few questions. So far, I have the first one in the second row, yeah.
Thank you, Officer, for your analysis. What I was missing in your analysis was about the fact that a lot of, I think, if you got it right, also like by reading newspapers and so on, is that China doesn't really have a lot of fighting experience compared to the US, Like the last proper war China fought was in Vietnam in the 70s, but the US was constantly being involved in some wars, was constantly allowed to test its own military equipment and so on. So isn't this like a very big advantage the US additionally has on top of all of its capacities and capabilities it has?
Okay, thank you. Next one. There is none at the moment. Yeah, yes, over here.
I put a question to Mr. Rottenberger. In the last blockade of Taiwan, we saw a lot of civil ships using containers with missile systems on top. We know the roll-on, roll-off freighters are also prepared to use by the People's Liberation Army's Navy. How do you see this combination of civil fleet and the military fleet and this dual use?
A third one, maybe. Yeah, over here in the second row.
Every once in a while you hear about the prospect that China could be going heads-on with Russia and trying to retake regions sort of around Vladivostok. So I wanted to ask if that's any real prospect or if that's just wishful thinking or yes.
Okay. Yeah, then maybe I add a question from my side. The question would be, Xi Jinping visited last year continental countries. This means Vietnam, Cambodia, but not the islands. But still, there was also another very important step. Indonesia became a member of the BRICS Plus. So far, the first country out of the southeastern questions. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And the question also maybe for the situation in Korea, the fact that North Korean troops got military practice in Ukraine quite a bit. I mean, there were 10,000 of soldiers active. Does this mean that maybe also their warfare experience did change fundamentally and maybe change already in the sense of not only capacities but capability to fight a war? And maybe also the question for this relation between China and America. It's quite interesting that in the American strategy, China is almost not mentioned at all. But at the other hand, there is this impetus and this clear stress on the importance of the first island chain, importance of the Western Pacific area and so on. So far, do you see maybe also differences between the official strategy and the strategy that is really behind? Okay, open, and I would say, who is the first panelist who tries to answer? Yeah, maybe.
So, hope this works. Thank you for the questions. Absolutely right. Yes, I couldn't mention everything, yeah, because I got limited time. I had 40 slides prepared and a couple of other things, but our president said make it up to 8 or 9. That's the result. So there are some, so to say, gaps. And I said, yes, you're very right in what you're saying that the PLA has today no fighting experience. That's absolutely clear. Unlike the US armed forces, who after the, I wouldn't say defeat, but after the retreat in Vietnam underwent a complete reshaping of the US armed forces in the 80s and 1990s. And the operation in the 1990s in near Middle East reshaped the US armed forces again. That had also an impact, so to say, on other areas, not only in maritime capabilities, air capabilities, also the development in space, in the cybersphere, that all developed. One thing which is, I would say, significant for the U.S. Armed Forces, that what they took from Vietnam till the 80s and the 90s is the principle of jointness. Yeah? That different parts of the forces work together, and they learn this from a very low level. Yeah? They work on this already on a tactical level, and on an operational level, it becomes an art. Jointness, and everybody has to undergo that. Every staff officer course, every commander's course in the US has jointness, working together as a core principle. This makes the United States Armed Forces the worldwide most formidable fighting power, because they can use all capacities, all capabilities joint. And that's a difference. So China, the PLA and the capabilities of the PLA are something which causes a headache for Western intelligence analysts. That's for very sure. But I found some interesting interesting studies. There are 3 studies. 2 I read myself. The third one I was not able to grab before doing my presentation tonight. But it is about the career path of the senior Chinese leadership, where these biographies and these CVs are available to us in the West, and we can read them. And Rand Corporation did some studies in 10 years ago, and another study was published, I think it's called The Great Dragons, not Great Panthers, The Great Dragons, was published in 2022. And in the Rand Corporation study, they compared American generals and admirals' career path to Chinese admiral and general's career path. And in American career, you will always find deployment abroad, experience in operations abroad, experience in jointness, international courses, yeah? Speaking several languages, different command function. And if you go in what has been published, be careful again, it's open source. If you see on Chinese general or admiral careers, they are very much in a career in their service. Yeah, either you're in the BLA Navy, so you start in the BL Navy, never change into a joint command, joint operation, or exercises, something like you go your way up. You are trusted. And you're experienced in a field. This is something where I think, with my humble understanding, I would say that might have an extraordinary impact in case of a military or hot confrontation between the US. Capacities of the PLA Navy towards Taiwan. As I understand, I'll address you directly. As we have seen, the use of not only the PLA Navy, but also the naval militia in the last couple of years, which has been built up as an arm of the PLA Navy in the South China Sea. I would say that all logistic enterprises, all logistic companies are included in plans of the BLA. That's for sure. So there's a massive capacity available. We don't know if it's a capability, if they can do it, but a massive capacity available, which outnumbers Taiwan capacity and capabilities by far. So yes, I think it's to the disadvantage of Taiwan. Korea, if I may say, last question from your side, Mr. President, about the Korean War experience, North Korean war experience. Well, those North Korean volunteers, we had also Chinese volunteers in the Korean War. Those poor chaps were sent in the 10,000s to the Ukrainian front with no equipment, no personal equipment, not the personal arms, rifles, I have to say, with nothing. They were, so to say, dressed and armed by the Russian armed forces and then trained there. It seems to me that they are not trained professional soldiers from North Korea. And what they bring back is just a feeling of misery on the battlefield. Yeah, that's the impression they got there. I don't think they bring back battle experience. I don't think. What is studied in North Korea, in the region, overall in Southeast Asia, is the tactics in the Ukrainian war, the cyber domain, of course, drones. Yeah, drones is a big issue. I was talking with a Chinese officer today in the Austrian MOD about drone developments, and this is something which is studied intensively, and especially when you start to connect drones with artificial intelligence. This is something. High technology is used on the Ukrainian battlefield in just such a low area that it does not significantly change our understanding of military technology and development.
Thank you. Sit down.
Yeah, well, just to follow up. I mean, what I have heard in Seoul is that the experience North Korea made had actually a negative effect from the point of view of the North Koreans, because the lesson learned by the present government, who was rather reluctant to have the joint maneuvers with the United States, that no, we will continue with these joint maneuvers because we need the training. And the North Koreans have shown that the army, contrary to other parts of the military, is completely outdated, and they lost something between 2,000 and 5,000 soldiers out of 10 to 15,000. I don't know how you calculate the ratio, but it's quite high, and they were used in the old Soviet style, just one wave after the others. And one could see on South Korean TV rather dramatic movies where they were running from drones. I mean, that was so because they simply didn't know. I think I would just like to make one more comment on the overall situation and the attitude of the United States towards China. As it was mentioned several times, they were spared basically heavy criticism in all the recent documents. So the concern I have heard in the region certainly is that Trump is trying to prepare his meeting with Xi Jinping and having a sort of G2 in mind. And this is a big concern in Japan. If this would have the effect, China take care of that region, and Japanese, good luck. It's concern for the Koreans, of course. Korea is there a little bit better off, relatively speaking, because they have an ongoing arms production. They sell a lot, including to Europe, and indirectly it ends up in the Ukraine. So this G2 idea in having this kind of deal is a big concern, and I think it's not just in the media. Policymakers are also quite concerned about that, because history tells us now in the last year that expect the unexpected, so I think this is something we can watch, what this summit meeting in April will produce, short term and long term.
Yeah, thank you. Elsa?
Yes, thank you. To answer your question about Indonesia and Xi Jinping's visit to Vietnam and Malaysia, I think it is quite clear that from a Chinese point of view, President Trump's tariff policy that was announced on April 2 had the aim of isolating China from its trading partners. And of course, the trading partners in the region are very, very important, because there is a lot of capital moving from China to Vietnam, for example, and many production places that were originally in China were then moved to Vietnam, because the labor was getting too costly in China already. And so I think the reason why he went to Vietnam and Malaysia is very much because he wanted to sort of coordinate their reaction to the tariff policy of Mr. Trump. And I don't think that they had any other special reasons to go there. This is also true to a certain extent with Indonesia, because there is a very large Chinese population in Indonesia, and therefore the trade relations between the People's Republic of China and Indonesia is very intensive, and it is very important for China, if they meet quotas or tariffs, that they have Indonesia as an outlier. And for that reason, China supported very strongly for Indonesia to be part of BRICS. And to a certain extent, we also have to keep in mind that China was not very amused about India becoming a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they're not very amused about India having quite a leverage in BRICS because it collaborates more closely with Russia than with China. And for that reason, China is very active in adding new members to BRICS that are more friendly to China. And so that they have more leverage in BRICS. And why do they need leverage in BRICS? This is very interesting because the Chinese are very afraid of the Russians being too radical. And one of the issues which they're really sort of not in consensus about is this question of de-dollarization. So, for example, in Kazan during the last BRICS meeting, the president of the Russian National Bank had prepared a big document on how to take steps in accelerating de-dollarization, and the Chinese said no. Right? And they are very much afraid that the Russians feel that the US is so weak at this particular moment that they could actually hit several decisive, how they put it, decisive blows against the US. But China does not want to hit a decisive blow against the US. And they don't want their relationship to the US to be more difficult than it already is. And so they need people in BRICS that support a more incremental approach towards issues like de-dollarization. The Vladivostok issue, I think I hear this Vladivostok issue coming up, and this, there is all this outer Manchuria that belongs to Siberia, and I think this is very much a sort of idea coming from the US. They want to relate to Russia, and they need to drive a wedge between Russia and China, and so they talk about these issues. But I think they underestimate that China has a very tactical and pragmatic attitude to this question. And they already came to a conclusion about the border region between China and Russia, and they are part of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and I don't think that anything regarding these borders is on China's agenda at this moment. Finally, I would like to ask you a question. And I'm really puzzled about the Prime Minister Takaichi, talking about if Taiwan has a contingency, Japan has a contingency. And I'm wondering whether this is actually something she did because she was out of control, or is this actually something that she did because she was coordinated, not only with people in Japan, but also with people in the US?
Well, thank you very much. Before coming to this, maybe just one comment on what you said a moment ago, yes. Indonesia, and I completely agree with you on the BRICS. I think an additional factor is maybe more important for China that Indonesia is a member of the BRICS Plus now, enlarged BRICS, which is important for the reasons you mentioned. But I think for China, the relationship with ASEAN and its member states has always been extremely important. And I think this has been sort of a battlefield in the economic, commercial field, and you have interests converging, you have the China plus ASEAN, you have the Japan plus ASEAN, you have the... So this is sort of a contest which is not played out necessarily in the purely security and military field, which also has a dimension, but I think it's obvious if you look at the map, if you look at the also increasing economic weight of the region, that everybody has a strong interest in making sure, if not aligning ASEAN to its side, at least making sure that it remains an area which is relatively open to your interests. I think that is extremely important. For the second point I would like to mention why does China not have more of a weight in the security and defense strategy? I think the same applies to Russia. And if you read the two documents, they are not very detailed as such. And I think this is not an omission. It's not necessarily also a statement of intent. It's much more, I think, the fact that I see it more as the United States giving certain markers. You know, obviously the Western Hemisphere, interesting enough, there you also don't really find Greenland or much of the Arctic, you know, which is a strong concern for reasons which go much beyond what we saw in Davos. There's some real security interest behind that, of course. But I think the United States has no interest at this stage to define a strategy towards China. It mentioned very clearly the interest it has in stability in the Indo-Pacific, its interest also freedom of navigation and commerce, therefore its intention to defend the first island chain. But beyond that, I think, as I said, the nuance is we are not necessarily interested in open and massive confrontation, which was more the statement during the Biden administration. We will let China live and give it space, provided they don't challenge basically our primacy in the area and do not really attack our substantial interests. Beyond that, I think those who say for Trump, the visit to China in April will be extremely important because I don't think it will go in the direction sort of a deal, commercial advantages versus giving up its political support for Taiwan, and I think that's far-fetched. I see it more in the sense that the United States, I think, realized in April and again in October that instead of being on the offensive with the spiral of ever higher tariffs imposed, it all of a sudden became on the defensive side. And I had some discussions in Beijing in November when I was there for a few days, and the sentiment I think I got that for the Chinese this was a big victory, you know, with the United States having to climb down and basically accept that the real weapons in the commercial field are on the Chinese side, with its export controls on rare earth and the supply chain issues and all that. So I think they adopt the wait and see attitude, and it's a bit the same thing on the United States side. They don't really want to give away too much at this moment. So I wouldn't really see the strategy papers that do as a clear sort of blueprint for where to go with China. On Takaichi, I think I was in Japan at the time when she made a statement, and I happened to watch the debate in the Japanese parliament. You know, so it appeared spontaneous. You know, it was the usual question and answer period in parliament. And on the question, she stood up and she didn't read the statement, which is very often the case with Japanese prime ministers on the diet. But she made this statement, but on the other hand, the way it was framed was also not purely spontaneous. So I think she was not necessarily, it was certainly in her papers as a contingency answer in a way, but I don't think she intended sort of to create the kind of message which it actually created in Beijing. But on the other hand, she made it very clear that she wouldn't step down. And I don't know if you saw that, but there was a follow-up the day before yesterday when she also made a statement to which, by the way, the spokesman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded yesterday or even this morning. When she was saying, well, on this involvement of Japan, we are no longer in a situation where we are purely restricted to the defense of Japan. And could anybody really imagine a situation where, for instance, in a contingency, Japanese and United States personnel or even civilians would have to be evacuated from Taiwan, and there were to be an attack on the United States in that context. Could anybody really think that Japan could just be aside and leave the ground? So basically, she was indicating we have an obligation. She even said, without that, what would be the sense and the credibility of the United States-Japan alliance? So I think this is something which I don't think is necessarily fueled from Washington, but where I think we have a situation where she is basically saying we have an alliance, we now have the means which we are increasing. Collective self-defense is a right for every state, and we will not really be intimidated by the Chinese to retract again to a situation where we will nothing more than a junior partner of the United States in an alliance. We have outgrown that. So it reflects, I think, definitely a new sort of understanding of what Japan's role would be and is. And in that context, I would have been interested, General Rottenberger, when with your chart, I couldn't see it very clearly, but when you sort of presented the comparison between the United States and Chinese forces, I don't think you included the Japanese capacities and capabilities. No. And I think it would be interesting because of, exactly against the background of what I said, because from the Japanese point of view, increasingly, sort of there's at least some intellectual or mental preparedness for a situation where this alliance could be called into question.
Yeah, let me sum up. Great presenters, great presentations, and great lessons we got tonight, I guess. Thank you so much, and you surely, you should get a very big hand. Second, an important announcement. Of course, we want to continue to occupy ourselves with the region. And on February the 11th, at the same time, 6 o'clock, the foreign minister of the Philippines will present herself. The Philippines are in the presidency of ASEAN this year. And insofar, it will be highly interesting also to listen to her ideas. And she also will be backed by Professor Gerstl, who will also give a few academic backgrounds, maybe in addition to that. So far, you are heartily invited, February 11. This was number 2, and number 3 is, it is the first big event in this year. I said it already. We had one with the ambassador of Sudan. And therefore, we would like to invite you not to leave at the moment, but to take a glass of wine, to ask questions to our presenters, and maybe to discuss a little bit how the world is going to look in the future. Thank you very much, and all the best.